There are places in America that feel curated roads, smoothed views, framed history packaged. Wyoming isn't one of them. Wyoming feels like someone forgot to put a lid on the world, because here, the land doesn't just sit beneath you. It moves. It breathes heat through the ground. It throws weather like a dare. It stretches so wide and so empty that your thoughts get louder just to fill the space. And the strangest part, the quiet, is the warning. In the Northwest, there's a national park where the ground is so alive, it hisses steam rising from nowhere, rivers warmed from underneath pools that look like they were poured straight out of a dream. Beneath that beauty is a vast volcanic system, the Yellowstone caldera. Roughly 85 by 45 kilometers, a scar of old fire still monitored because the story isn't over. And just south of that, almost like the world decided to switch from ancient chaos to sharp perfection, the Tetons rise. The Grand Teton hits 13,775 feet, and it doesn't look like a mountain that waited politely to be formed. It looks like a blade that arrived suddenly, now pulled back even farther. Wyoming's average elevation sits around 6,700 feet, one of the highest in the country. So you're not just traveling across a state, you're traveling across an upland. Air thins, light changes, distances lie to you, and the wind. Wyoming's signature doesn't behave like weather. It behaves like a personality. It scours ridge lines. It snaps flags into surrender. It makes entire towns feel like they were built as an experiment. Can humans actually live here? So tonight, we're not doing a basic road trip. We're stepping into a place where the American West still feels raw, where the beauty isn't a postcard, it's a force. We're going to follow the seams of this land, from steaming geothermal basins to ice-carved peaks, from sagebrush oceans to migration corridors older than the roads that cut across them. And if Wyoming has a secret, it's this: it doesn't care if you're ready. Here's the promise of this journey. We'll chase Wyoming's extremes, not just the famous ones, but the ones you feel in your bones. We'll start where the planet leaks its heat. In Yellowstone, the surface tells you what's happening underneath. A boardwalk can carry you past boiling water and earth stained with minerals like paint. It's beautiful, but it's also a reminder this landscape was built by violence and it's still restless. Then we'll slide south into the Grand Teton region, where reflection lakes sit under jagged ridgelines, where morning light turns the peaks into something almost unreal. But even here, the drama isn't just in the skyline. It's in the quiet motion of life below elk, moving through willows, shadows crossing open flats, and pronghorn, fast, nervous, built for distance. Pronghorn can sprint around 60 miles per hour, and when winter starts to close in, they migrate threading through narrow corridors where fences and roads try to interrupt an ancient habit. On one stretch, the National Park Service describes this route as the second longest terrestrial migration in North America. It's not just wildlife footage, it's a living map of what Wyoming was before we arrived. And Wyoming is full of these collisions, wild movement versus human lines. You'll see it in the energy of the place too. This is a state famous for wind, so much so that its wind resource is often described as among the strongest in the US. And massive wind projects have been planned or built to harvest what Wyoming gives away for free. But step away from the headlines and the parks, and a different Wyoming appears, one that's even more world's edge. Long highways where the horizon doesn't change for an hour. High basins where the sky feels too close at night. Towns that look like they're holding on out of stubborn pride. Landscapes that don't try to entertain you. They dare you to stay still long enough to understand them. So the question isn't, what will we see in Wyoming? The question is, what will Wyoming pull out of us when there's nowhere to hide from the scale, the silence, and the raw truth of the land? Because the land keeps asking the same question in different forms. Can you live with less noise, less convenience, less protection from the elements? And if you can, what do you hear in yourself when the world finally goes quiet? So here's how we'll travel Wyoming in this documentary, not as a checklist, but as a descent into its layers. We begin in the northwest, where the earth leaks heat and the surface feels alive. Then we move south into the Tetons, where rock and ice built a skyline that looks too sharp to be real. After that, we cross into the open country basins and plains, where the story shifts from spectacle to scale, from landmarks to atmosphere. And along the way, we'll keep chasing the same thread. Wyoming isn't trying to impress you. It's trying to reveal what the planet looks like when it hasn't been tamed. Because once you've felt Wyoming really felt it, you stop describing it as a state. You start describing it as a boundary, a place where the modern world thins out and something older begins. You don't arrive in Yellowstone the way you arrive in most places. You cross a line, and suddenly the land starts behaving differently, like it's operating on another set of rules. The forest looks normal. The road feels ordinary. And then without warning, you see its steam rising from the ground like a signal flare. Not from a chimney, not from a cabin, from the earth itself. Yellowstone is beautiful in a way that doesn't feel entirely safe, because here, the planet is still doing active work at the surface. Start with the simplest moment you step onto a boardwalk. It's just wood under your feet. But the reason it exists is unsettling, because the ground beside you can be hot enough to burn, fragile enough to break alive enough to change between seasons. And the first thing Yellowstone teaches you is this: the land is not solid in the way you think it is. You pass pools that look like polished glass. Then you realize the glass is boiling water. You see colors that feel painted electric blues, mineral whites, rust reds, sulfur yellows. But those colors aren't for show. They're chemistry. They're heat signatures. They're the fingerprints of a system working underneath. Some places hiss, some places breathe, some places sound like they're whispering. And you can't tell if it's steam or the world warning you to keep your distance. And then there's the moment every first-time visitor remembers. Old Faithful. People gather like it's a concert, but the stage is just empty air and a patch of ground that looks almost too quiet. And when it erupts, when the water rises like a white pillar and the steam climbs into the sky, you feel something strange, not excitement, but a kind of humility. Because it's not a performance, it's a routine the Earth has been doing without us. But Yellowstone isn't only geysers. If you stop there, you miss the deeper story, the one that makes this place feel like an entire world sealed inside one boundary. This is where Wyoming becomes cinematic on a different scale. Wide valleys, where mist hangs low at sunrise, and the light turns the river into a ribbon of metal. Hills that look gentle until you spot movement bison massive and slow like living history. Elk in the trees, coyotes cutting across open ground like quick shadows. And sometimes, if you're patient and lucky, a wolf line in the distance, silent, purposeful, changing the entire mood of the landscape without making a sound. Yellowstone has predators, yes, but more than that, it has balanced the feeling that the ecosystem is still negotiating itself in real time. And then come the places that feel almost alien, mud pots, where the earth bubbles like it's cooking. Fumaroles, vents of steam that roar softly like kettles, too big for your mind to measure. Geyser basins, where the ground is a patchwork of crust and water and heat. It's gorgeous. It's unsettling. And here's the most cinematic truth: Yellowstone can look like paradise in the frame and feel like a warning in your chest. Because the deeper you go, the more you realize this isn't just nature. This is geology still awake. So when we film Yellowstone, we're not only capturing landscapes, we're capturing evidence. Evidence that the Earth is not finished. Evidence that stability is an illusion. Evidence that the West, this mythic American idea, was built on top of forces far older than the myth. And when you stand there, surrounded by steam and silence, you start thinking differently, not about travel, about time, because Yellowstone makes you feel tiny in a way the ocean does. It makes you feel like your life is a blink. And the land will still be here, breathing heat long after we're gone. But we're not staying only in the heat, because Wyoming's story is not one note. After Yellowstone, we'll move towards stone and ice the Tetons, where the world stops hissing and starts cutting sharp lines into the sky. And that contrast, that shift from steaming ground to jagged peaks, that's where Wyoming starts to feel less like a destination and more like the planet showing you two different faces in the same breath. Leaving Yellowstone feels like leaving a living laboratory. The steam fades. The hiss disappears. The road pulls you south, and then almost suddenly, the skyline changes. The Tetons don't rise gently. They erupt. A jagged wall of stone punches out of the earth, like the planet decided to draw a line between ordinary and impossible. And the first time you see Grand Teton, you don't even react with words. You react with a pause, a longer breath. That quiet moment where your brain tries to measure something it wasn't built to measure. The air here feels different, lighter, crisper, as if it's been filtered through snow. And the light behaves like it's in love with these peaks. At sunrise, the mountains turn pale gold, then fire red, then cool back into gray, like a mood swing. At sunset, the ridgeline becomes a blade against the sky. And when clouds roll in, the Tetons don't disappear. They become darker, more dramatic, more mythic, like they were designed for cinema. This is where you film wide enough to make the viewer feel small, wide enough to let the silence be heard. And then you drop into Jackson Hole. The valley itself is spacious and open, a place where rivers braid through flats and willows, and the mountains loom so close they feel like they're leaning in to listen. The name Jackson Hole sounds playful, almost casual, but the landscape isn't casual at all. It's grand, exposed, and emotionally heavy in the best way. This is a place where morning fog can turn a meadow into a dream, and 5 minutes later, the sun can burn it away like it never happened. This is also where Wyoming's wild feels intimate, not tiny intimate. This place is still huge, but closer, more present. You'll see moose in the willows if you move quietly, elk in the early light, eagles cutting circles above the water. Sometimes a bear-shaped shadow at the edge of the trees, just a suggestion, just enough to make your body wake up. Because the Tetons are not a theme park mountain range. They're a working wilderness, and there's something honest about that. Now here's what makes this section feel like the world's edge instead of a normal travel video. The Tetons look perfect, but the perfection is sharp. There's no softness in these peaks, no gentle slopes to ease your eyes. The mountains feel like they were made in a hurry, raw, steep, uncompromising. And that changes you as a viewer. Your gaze becomes more attentive. Your breathing slows. You stop scrolling in your mind. You start watching. So if we're building a film rhythm here, this is the sequence that locks people in. A long approach shot the peaks emerging, while the road runs straight. A sudden cut to reflection, still water, inverted mountains, the tiniest ripple breaking the illusion. A slow pan across the ridgeline, let the jaggedness do the talking. Wildlife insert quiet movement in the foreground, mountains towering behind life and stone in the same frame. Close-up details, ice on branches wind through grasses, the sound of water over rocks, then back to wide again, because the wide shot is the emotional punch. And the emotional truth of the Tetons is this: they make you feel both protected and exposed. Protected because the valley feels like a cradle beneath the peaks. Exposed because the mountains remind you how small your plans are. This is where people come to feel free, but the freedom has weight. It asks something from you. It asks you to be present. It asks you to stop narrating your life and just listen to what the world sounds like without your voice on top of it. And that's the Tetons' real power. They don't entertain you. They interrupt you. But Wyoming doesn't stop here. If Yellowstone is the earth awake, and the Tetons are the earth sharpened, then what comes next is the earth opened. We're leaving the peaks behind. We're heading into the wide Wyoming basins, plains wind corridors, where the story becomes less about dramatic skylines and more about the kind of space that changes a person When you leave the Tetons, the world doesn't get smaller. It gets emptier. And at first, you might think emptiness means nothing. But Wyoming teaches you a different definition. Out here, emptiness is not absence, it's space. Space so big, it makes you feel your own thoughts moving around inside it. The peaks fade behind you like a memory, and the land opens into something flatter, harsher, and strangely hypnotic basins. High plains, long stretches of sagebrush that roll like a gray-green sea. This is the Wyoming most people drive through without understanding, but it might be the Wyoming that stays with you the longest. Because once the mountains are gone, you start noticing the other forces. The wind is the first one, not the gentle wind that cools a summer day. This is wind with intention. Wind that leans into your car. Wind that tears at your jacket. Wind that turns a quiet road into a test of attention. It can come out of nowhere, and it can stay for hours like the state is breathing through a giant invisible mouth. The wind shapes everything. Here trees grow. Angled snow drifts form like sculpture. And even the silence has texture because the wind is never truly silent. And that's why Wyoming feels alive even when you can't see movement. Now, the camera language changes. In Yellowstone and the Tetons, you can rely on spectacle steam peaks, reflection lakes. Here, the spectacle is scale, distance, the way the horizon refuses to come closer. So we film the road not as a transition, but as a scene. Long, straight highways where the sky is half the frame. Truck lights in the far distance like tiny red punctuation marks. A lone fence line cutting across the land like someone tried to underline the wilderness. And every once in a while, something moves. A pronghorn, sudden and alert, appearing like a flicker across the flat. A group of mule deer at the edge of the road, watching you as if you're the strange animal. A hawk on a post perfectly still, using the wind like a tool. Because that's how life survives here, not by fighting the elements, by partnering with them. And then you start noticing the human layer again. Because in the wide country, humans don't blend into the landscape the way they do in cities. They stand out. A small town appears like a mirage, then becomes real. A few streets, a gas station, a diner sign, a cluster of homes with yards that look like they were carved out of a place that never promised comfort. These towns feel like they were built for one reason: necessity. Railroad, mining, ranching, energy, weather, geography. And in Wyoming, necessity is a powerful architect. People don't live here because it's convenient. They live here because the land made them stubborn. If you stay long enough, the wide Wyoming starts to do something unexpected. It slows time because there are fewer cues telling your brain to rush, fewer interruptions, less noise, less crowd energy. The land doesn't reward impatience. It punishes it. Out here, you learn to watch the sky for weather. You learn to respect distance. You learn that close and far are not what they seem. And at night, when the towns fall quiet, and the plains go dark, the stars don't look decorative. They look like a ceiling you didn't know existed. This is where the documentary becomes intimate again, not because the space is small, but because the space forces you inward. So this is our transition point. We've seen Wyoming's fire in Yellowstone. We've seen Wyoming's blade-edge beauty in the Tetons. Now we're feeling Wyoming's true body, the wide expanse where the West stops performing and starts revealing itself. And the next layer is not scenery, it's story. Because Wyoming's wide country has been crossed, claimed, fought over, worked, and mythologized for generations. Trails, rail lines, ranch routes, human movement, etched over older natural movement. This is where the film turns toward the past that still sits in the present. In the next section, we're going to step into Wyoming's frontier echoes, into places where the Old West isn't a costume, but a shadow rail town's outlaw legends, boom and bust dreams, and the quiet fact that the land always outlasts the people who try to own it. Wyoming's wide country doesn't just feel empty. It feels haunted, not by ghosts in the horror movie sense, by something quieter, by stories that never fully left, by footsteps that got swallowed by distance, by names that still float around like dust when the wind kicks up, because Wyoming wasn't built gently. It was built by movement of animals, movement of weather, movement of people chasing survival, wealth, power, or escape. And once you start following that idea movement, you start seeing the state differently. The railroad is where the modern Wyoming story hardens into steel. Before rail lines, this land was a brutal promise, so big it could swallow a person and never report back. Then the tracks came slicing across basins and plains, like a decision that couldn't be undone. Towns appeared because trains needed water, coal repairs rest. Some of those towns survived. Others flared up and vanished, leaving behind nothing but foundations and a name on an old map. This is the American West in its truest rhythm: boom, dust, silence. And then, because human nature doesn't change just because the landscape is big, the frontier brought its favorite characters, outlaws. Not the romantic version from movies where everything is swagger and clean hats. The real kind, desperate, hunted, sometimes clever, sometimes reckless, always one bad decision away from a grave no one visits. Wyoming has the kind of terrain that makes outlaw mythology possible: long distances, hiding places, harsh winters that erase tracks, and small towns where everyone notices strangers except when the wind is loud enough to cover your arrival. Even if you don't name a single outlaw, you can feel why stories like that were born here. Because Wyoming makes secrecy practical, and it makes consequences final. Now here's the cinematic trick for this section. We don't over-explain. We let the land do the talking. We show an abandoned building in the middle of nowhere. Wood-warped paint flaking windows like empty eyes. We cut to rusted metal, a faded sign, a road that goes straight into the horizon. We let a train horn sound in the far distance like a lonely animal call. Then we pull back wide again. Because the wide shot is the punchline. Everything humans built out here looks temporary when you frame it against Wyoming's scale, and you start realizing something uncomfortable. The frontier wasn't heroic. It was expensive. It cost lives. It cost cultures. It cost entire ways of living that were already here long before railroads and boom towns. The land remembers that too, even if the modern world only wants the cool version of the story. So when we talk about Wyoming's past, we don't do it like a postcard. We do it like a layer you can still feel under your feet, because you can drive through Wyoming and see only Western vibes, or you can stop and notice what's underneath. Why towns are spaced the way they are, why certain roads exist, why some places feel like they're hanging on by willpower alone, why the wind seems to carry a kind of permanent tension. This is where the documentary becomes less about "look how beautiful" and more about "look what happened here." And then you hit the modern frontier, because Wyoming didn't leave the boom and bust mindset behind. It just changed the reasons. Energy replaced gold. Infrastructure replaced horses. But the rhythm is familiar. People arrive for opportunity, build a life fast, then wonder if the land will let them keep it. In Wyoming, the land is never fully tamed. It's negotiated with, even now. And here's the re-hook, the quiet one, that makes viewers lean in. Wyoming's frontier story isn't only history. It's still running. It's running in the way communities survive far from everything. It's running in the way weather still decides outcomes. It's running in the way the land keeps demanding respect, even from modern technology. So the question becomes, if this is a place built on movement, what happens when the biggest movement is no longer people or trains, but the migration of life itself? In the next section, we follow Wyoming's living heartbeat, wildlife movement, winter pressure, and the thin corridors where survival becomes a narrow path. Because in a state this wide, the most dramatic story might be happening quietly, right in front of us. If you want to see Wyoming's true pulse, don't look for crowds, look for movement, because the most dramatic story here isn't always a geyser erupting or a mountain catching sunrise. It's life crossing distance season after season. Like a ritual, the land refuses to forget. Wyoming is not just wild, it's wild in motion. Start with the pronghorn. They don't look like they belong to one specific era. They look like an animal designed for the open light alert, always ready to run, as if the horizon itself is chasing them. They move with nervous elegance, and when they decide to go, they go fast, fast enough to make the landscape feel slow. But speed isn't the real story. The real story is where they go. Because every year, as the seasons tighten, Wyoming becomes a map of corridors. Wildlife doesn't migrate randomly. It migrates through memory routes carved by instinct geography and survival. These pathways are older than highways, older than fences, older than the idea that land can be owned. And yet today, those ancient lines are being squeezed. This is where the film gets emotionally sharp, because a migration corridor can be wide in your imagination, but narrow in reality. One fence can turn a flowing movement into panic. One road can turn instinct into hesitation. One winter storm can turn a journey into a countdown. So we don't just show animals running, we show animals pausing. We show the hesitation, the moment they stand at a barrier deciding whether to risk it. We show the line of bodies following one leader, each animal trusting the next, because there isn't time to debate. In those moments, Wyoming stops feeling like nature footage. It feels like a survival story. Then come the elk. When elk move, it's not nervous, like pronghorn. It's heavy, deliberate, like a slow-moving tide. A herd in winter looks like a single organism made of many bodies. Steam from their breath, hooves breaking crusted snow. The sound of movement that isn't loud, but is constant. And you start understanding the truth. Winter in Wyoming is not just weather, it's a pressure system of life. Cold compresses everything. Food becomes scarce. Energy becomes currency. Every step costs something. Every wrong turn gets punished. This is why migration matters. It's not a choice, it's a strategy. And then predators, not as villains, not as monsters, as part of the same equation. A coyote line across open ground. A wolf shape moving at the edge of vision. A silence that changes when something is hunting. When predators are present, the landscape feels sharper. Not because it's more dangerous for us, but because it's more honest. You're watching an ecosystem that still contains tension, still contains consequences. Wyoming doesn't sanitize that tension, it frames it. Now here's where we make this section unforgettable for the viewer. We juxtapose beauty with obstacle. We show a wide, gorgeous plain sunlight like gold on snow, and then we cut to a fence line. We show pronghorn moving confidently, then stopping. We show the emptiness of the land, then reveal the thin places where movement is forced into a single narrow path. Because in a place that feels infinite, survival can still depend on a few meters of access. That contrast hits hard, and it forces a question that feels bigger than Wyoming. What does it mean to love the wild if we keep slicing it into pieces? Wyoming is famous for space, but space alone doesn't protect life. Life needs continuity. It needs routes. It needs those invisible highways that aren't marked on tourist maps. So this isn't just an animal story. It's a story about whether the land can stay whole. And then we pivot again, because Wyoming isn't only movement across plains. It's also water, hidden water, cold water, water that decides where life concentrates, where towns exist, where valleys green up, where the sky reflects itself in long, quiet curves. In the next section, we follow Wyoming's rivers and basins, how water shapes this dry, high land, and why the most peaceful scenes in the film might be the ones built on the most fragile resource. After the wind, after the wide plains, after the tension of migration, you start noticing something you didn't pay attention to at first. Water, not as an obvious feature. Wyoming doesn't throw water at you the way coastal places do. Here, water is subtle. It hides in valleys. It threads through basins. It appears as sudden green in a world of sage and stone. And because it's less visible, it feels more precious in a high, dry landscape. Water becomes the architect. Where there's water, there's life clustered like a secret. Where there's water, the color shifts brown to green, gray to gold. Where there's water, the sky finally has a surface to look at itself. This is one of Wyoming's most cinematic tricks. You drive for an hour through open plains and feel like the world is made of dust and light. And then you drop into a river corridor and suddenly everything is alive. Willows, cottonwoods, birds, shadows moving in the brush. It feels like discovering a hidden room inside a house you thought you already understood. And water changes the tone of the film. Yellowstone and the Tetons were about dramatic forces, heat rock height. But water brings intimacy, a slow river at dawn. Mist rising in thin layers. A bend in the stream, catching sunlight like a ribbon. The small sounds, ripples, insects, distant bird calls, suddenly louder than your thoughts. This is where we let the documentary breathe, not because the story gets less intense, but because the intensity becomes quiet. Now, Wyoming's water isn't always calm. Snowmelt feeds rivers that can swell and change the shape of banks. Storms can turn small channels into sudden energy. And in some places, water doesn't feel like a comfort. It feels like a boundary. A line you can't cross without respect. But most of the time, the feeling is fragile because you can sense how easily it could disappear. In the wide, dry country, you don't take water for granted. You don't assume it will always be there. You start seeing it as a thin thread holding ecosystems together, and that makes every river scene feel like a quiet miracle. Here's how we film this section to make it emotionally hit. Wide shot, dry plains, endless horizon wind pushing grasses, hard cut, sudden green corridor water appearing like a secret. Slow tracking shot, river surface reflecting sky mountains now only a memory. Close-ups, reeds swaying droplets on leaves, bird footprints in mud, then silence, a long hold, no talking, just water moving. Because the rhythm matters. This is the calm that makes the next tension feel sharper. And water also reveals another Wyoming truth. Even the most peaceful landscapes are built on negotiation. Ranching towns, wildlife, agriculture, everything depends on water access. In a place, this big water decides who can stay, who must move, what survives, what fails. Wyoming's dramas aren't always loud. Sometimes they're about a river running lower than it used to, a wetland shrinking, a spring arriving earlier, a winter not lasting as long. Tiny changes, huge consequences, and that gives us a new rehook. What happens to the Wild West when the wild resource underneath it becomes uncertain? Because you can't separate Wyoming's identity from its water. It's the quiet engine behind the beauty. And now we set up the final emotional turn of the film. We've walked through fire and steam. We've stood under knife-edge peaks. We've crossed wide plains and felt wind like a personality. We've followed migrations under pressure. We've discovered water as a hidden thread. So what's left? The thing that always arrives at the end of a journey like this, the feeling. What Wyoming does to a person when the camera turns away from landmarks and starts looking inward. Music warm, restrained. At some point in Wyoming, you stop filming only what's in front of you, and you start filming what it does to you, because the longer you stay here, the more the landscape stops feeling like scenery and starts feeling like a mirror. Wyoming is a place that strips away noise, not just city noise, mental noise. The constant friction of being watched, being hurried, being surrounded. Out here, the world doesn't compete for your attention, so your attention turns inward. This is when towns start to matter, not because they're big, because they're small. A few buildings, a diner sign, a cluster of houses, under a sky that feels too wide to belong to anyone. The kind of place where the gas station isn't just a stop, it's a meeting point, where a single streetlight can feel like a beacon, where people learn each other's rhythms because the land doesn't allow anonymity to last long. And the camera doesn't treat these towns like cute Western stops. It treats them like outposts, because that's what they are, human islands in a sea of weather. And the people here, there's a texture to them that matches the land. Not loud, not performative, practical. You don't get the sense that Wyoming asks people to be tough in a dramatic way. It asks them to be tough in a quiet way by showing up anyway, by fixing what breaks, by keeping moving when winter decides to make a point. This is where the modern West becomes less of a myth and more of a reality. Not cowboy hats and sunsets, but work distance and the daily math of survival. And still, Wyoming has beauty that feels almost unfair. A sunrise that lights up frost like glitter. A storm rolling across a plain like an approaching ocean. A moment when the wind drops and the world goes so still you can hear your own breathing, like it's the loudest thing in existence. These are the moments that change you, because they don't come with instructions. They just happen, and you either notice or you miss them. Wyoming also gives you something modern. Life rarely gives solitude without shame. In many places, being alone feels like a problem. Here, being alone can feel like a natural state, like you're finally matching the scale of your own mind, like you're allowed to be quiet without having to justify it. And that's a dangerous kind of peace, not because it harms you, because it makes you realize how loud everything else has been. So the human story of Wyoming isn't only who lives here, it's what happens to anyone who passes through and actually pays attention. Because a land this wide teaches you a few truths you can't unlearn You are not the center of the world. Convenience is not a guarantee. Nature does not negotiate on your schedule. Silence can be a teacher. And once you learn those things, even briefly, you don't return to normal life the same way. You come back more sensitive, more aware, sometimes more restless. This is where our documentary begins its final arc. We've explored Wyoming's external extremes. Now, we land on its internal impact, and we let the viewer feel the shift from spectacle to meaning, because the real edge we reach in Wyoming isn't a cliff or a peak, it's a mental edge. The point where you realize the world doesn't exist to entertain you. It exists to humble you, to widen you, to remind you you're alive. So before we close this journey, we return to the simplest image in the film, a road. Not because roads are exciting, but because in Wyoming, a road is a line through something ancient, a reminder that we're passing through, that the land remains, that the wind will keep moving whether we're here to hear it or not. In the end, Wyoming doesn't leave you with one image. It leaves you with a feeling that the world is bigger than your routines. That silence can be louder than a city. That beauty doesn't always come gently. Sometimes it arrives sharp, steaming wind cut, and absolutely uninterested in whether you're comfortable. Wyoming doesn't try to charm you. It changes you. Think back through what we crossed. We started where the earth still leaks heat Yellowstone, where the ground hisses and colors bloom from chemistry, where boiling water looks like glass and the planet feels unfinished. Then we moved into stone and ice, the Tetons, knife-edge mountains, rising like a sudden decision, reflections so perfect they look unreal, wilderness that feels intimate only because it's so honest. After that, we entered the wide country, the plains and basins where the horizon refuses to come closer, where wind becomes a character, where the road itself turns into a scene and space becomes a pressure you can't escape. We followed life in motion, migration, under winter's wait animals, moving through invisible corridors, survival, depending on roots so old they feel like memory written into muscle. We found water, thin, precious, shaping green corridors through dry land, turning the film quiet and intimate, reminding us that even the most peaceful frames can be built on fragile resources. And finally, we arrived at the human feeling, the way towns cling to distance, the way solitude stops being a problem and becomes a gift, the way this land makes you listen to yourself. That's the truth of Wyoming. It's not one place, it's layers. Fire beneath the surface, stone cutting the sky, wind ruling the plains, life moving across ancient paths, water threading everything together, and people, small, stubborn, present, living inside all of it. And if you've made it this far into the journey, you already know what the film has been quietly saying from the start. Wyoming isn't here to impress you. It's here to remind you that the earth is alive. That distance still exists. That nature can still feel bigger than us. That there are places where you don't have to perform a life, you can simply witness one. And maybe that's the real reason we travel to the edge of the world, not to collect locations, but to return with a different scale inside us. So if this documentary pulled you into Wyoming, if you felt that quiet pressure of the plains, the sharp shock of the Tetons, the uneasy beauty of Yellowstone, then keep going with us, because there are more edges, more lands that don't just show you something, they reveal something. If you want, tell me where you want to go next. A country, a region, a name you've never heard but feel curious about. And we'll take the camera there. We'll take the story there. We'll find the next place where the world still feels unfinished.